Hey guys, welcome back to another impressions video. Here to talk about one of the latest games I beat, Ace Combat 7 Skies Unknown for the PlayStation 4. Another 2019 release that I was able to beat. I'm trying to power play through a lot of the 2019 games that I was interested in, and I'm really glad I did with Ace Combat 7 because I thoroughly enjoyed this game. And as you guys can see here, I have older games in the series. Just to give a quick background of my experience with previous games in the series, which is not very extensive, but I do want to give my background with the Ace Combat series. I played the first one I played was back in the PlayStation 2 era, back in South America. I had a friend that I can't remember if it was Ace Combat 4 or 5, but I do remember playing that game. Kind of like the first few missions, he was showing me the game, and I really enjoyed it. And then fast forward to when Ace Combat Horizon came out. Combat Horizon came out on the PlayStation 3. I had a friend here in the US already that when this game came out, I remember, I think it was 2011 or 2012, he bought a PlayStation 3 just to play this game. And of course he bought other games, but I remember he asked for help, can you help me buy a PlayStation 3? So I remember we went to GameStop and then went back to his house, plugged everything in, and then played a couple of the first missions in this game. And then years later I bought this game on discounted, but I never got around to playing it on my own, on the PlayStation 3. And then we have the 3DS version, Ace Combat Legacy, which is a remake of an older Ace Combat game. I didn't really play this game much, but that takes me to Ace Combat 7, the first game in the series that I truly beat and put a lot of time into it. And I'm really glad I did, because I had a fantastic time with my Ace Combat 7 experience here. And of course, the good thing about this game is that the story is self-contained. So even if you guys have not played any of the games in the series, even though there are certain aspects of the story, such as places and characters and happenings from previous games, it's very well self-contained, so that you can play it for the first time and still enjoy the game, in my opinion. Now, the story is not, in my opinion, is not one of the strongest points in the game. It's a little bit convoluted because it's one of those games that the story it's being told through cinematic sequences from mission to mission, and a lot of the things that happen kind of start making sense later on in the game. So at first you're kind of like out there in the cold trying to understand what's going on, but as the chapters or missions progress, and as you watch more cinematic FMVs, you start actually learning about the story, the characters, and what's going on in the game. So in my opinion, not one of the strongest points in the game, but nevertheless entertaining, because the graphical fidelity of the FMVs, of the story being told through the game, it's fantastic, and I'm gonna get into that when we talk about the graphics. But the story, it takes place in Strange Real, which is kind of like this universe from previous Ace Combat games, and it's everlasting, or it's a battle against the ocean and Eurasian, I think it's how it's pronounced, forces in the game, and the battles revolve around this the international space elevator, I think it's called. There are some conflicts earlier on in the game where this place is attacked. This place that was built to boost the economy of the continent, but it's attacked by the Eurasian forces, and then you take part as the Ocean forces. And then earlier on in the game, certain things happen that put you in the penal military unit. So you're basically sent to you play as Trigger, which is kind of like the protagonist of the game. And when you first start the game, you're this rookie, stud pilot. And then something happens in one of the earlier chapters, and you get basically demoted to the penal unit, which is kind of like the worst of the worst. And you get put through do all the dirty work basically for the Ocean forces. So you go from being like an elite rookie pilot to the bottom of the barrel with other outcasts, if you will. But as you make progress through the story and the game, obviously you improve and you get recognition and you're back towards the end of the game to your to have the respect of the forces. So again, the story not the best, and there are other characters and happenings in the story of the game, but in my opinion, not the strongest point. As far as graphics, I was really impressed with the game, both with the in-game graphics and the graphics in the cinematic sequences. The game makes use of like very high contrast and colors, creating this like hyper realistic look to the game, where in some of the cinematic sequences, like the game almost blends reality with computer graphics. Like it really looks real in certain shots, and you know, combined with the art direction, the photography, you know, the colors that the game uses, and obviously the technology. Some of the graphics are really amazing to watch during the cinematic sequences. They made a fantastic job. I think this game was developed by an internal Bandai Namco group, Project Aces, and they did a fantastic job. They've been developing the Ace Combat games for a while now, and they really graphically they pull it through in this game. And then as far as the main game, I was very impressed with the graphics at the same time. Obviously, you know, when you start paying attention, there are some lower quality textures, you know, namely, you know, like the ground and everything like that. When you watch the replays towards, when you complete a mission, you have like a replay session where you can watch your plane from different camera angles. And of course, when your plane gets closer to like the surface or the existing environment, you can see some low quality textures, but for the most part, I thought the effects were very impressive, like the clouds, the lighting effects on your plane, on your cabin. I'd enjoyed it thoroughly, and I did spend some time watching the replays after the missions, you know, just to admire the graphics of the game, and add to that the different sceneries and the different weather conditions and the different times of day, you know, different lighting effects for when the game is playing during the morning, afternoon, or there are some even night missions out there. I think the game did a pretty good job of having a just overall good graphics that were, in my opinion, very impressive. Sound-wise, I think that it's an area where the game shines. The game does have a soundtrack that it's very like epic, you know, in terms of raising up the motivational aspect, you know, in some missions, and then of course you have the voice acting. The script is pretty good, very technical, very geared towards what the game is, which is a flying combat game, and you know, you have a very technical language related to that. So the game does a very good job of giving you that immersion, you know, of being a jet fighter pilot out there, and you know, being able to fly these planes. And of course, gameplay is where the I'm gonna spend some time talking. The game, the game it's an arcade flying game, but in my opinion, it's a step above just a typical arcade game. When I think of arcade games, flying games, I think of like games like Star Fox. You know, that those to me are like fully quote unquote arcade type games. And games like the Ace Combat games, in my opinion, they take it up a notch. They're a little bit more involved. They're a little bit more complicated in terms of the gameplay and the controls. And they're not obviously simulation games. Obviously, they're far from that. But at the same time, they provide that a step above arcade gameplay, in my opinion, which I find very enjoyable because they're a little bit more involved. They require you a little bit more investment in learning the controls and what's going on, but in my opinion, it's worth it. And in terms of learning the game, I do have to say a major negative. The game, it's a little bit deceiving. You know, when you play the first mission, you know, you have your plane, you're about to take off, and the game tells you, push R2 to initiate your jet engine or whatever, and hold R2 for throttle, and then L2 is to lower your speed. So the game gives you very basic control features, and then when you go on the second mission, I think they teach you how to use the yaw controls like L1 and R1, kind of like shift your plane make your plane turn without rolling. So the game it's very deceiving because they teach you like certain things, but they don't teach you other things that are very important, like how to lock on, how to change targets. So I had to go online. The game doesn't have a manual, obviously, so you have to go online, and I had to figure it out. How to use flares because I forgot. Playing the PS3 version, and I don't even know if the PS3 version has the same controls. But in order to use flares, the game doesn't teach you how to use flares. It doesn't teach you how to lock on into enemies or how to switch targets, and that can become a little bit frustrating. So the game is not very hand-holdy, but which in my opinion is a negative. I think the game should have had at least a tutorial section, or at least during the regular missions, just have some prompts on screen telling you what to do instead of you trying to figure it out on your own. The game does offer two game or control types, normal and expert. I find it very hard to choose between the two because I play a lot of Battlefield games, as you guys know, and Battlefield 3 and 4 have the jet, but you can fly jets in those games, and I'm pretty used to having roll controls on your control, but I was not able to emulate those or to copy those control configurations into Ace Combat. The expert controls resembled somewhat what I was trying to do. Like I wanted to be able to have control over doing rolls, but the game when you do the rolls on your I want to say your left thumbstick, your right thumbstick, it's very sensitive with the camera controls, and it just doesn't work the way I wanted. So I resorted to what I call the Star Fox controls, which is the standard, which unfortunately takes away some of the immersion in the game. By playing standard, you're not able to roll or do some of the maneuvers like the low G-force maneuvers to avoid missiles. So that prompted me to just play the game on easy mode, which to me, easy mode in this game, it's more like a normal difficulty. And then if you play normal, it's more like hard difficulty, and if you play hard difficulty and so on, you guys can get the picture. But easy is very challenging, especially at the beginning when you don't have enough money in this game. You can gain money by completing single player missions or playing multiplayer, and of course at the beginning of the game you have the planes that are not very good stats wise. So my advice is, or what I did, I was trying to play a couple multiplayer rounds in between the missions in order to gain money. The currency in this game is the MRP, and that allows you to buy upgrades and new jet fighters or new planes that you can add to your hangar. And obviously, my advice is get the best planes as earlier as you can. And that makes a huge difference actually, because again, I was trying to play the game some multiplayer to gain MRPs, and I was able to get to unlock or buy some of the advanced fighters in the game, such as I was able to get the F-18 somewhat earlier in the game, and then I was able to jump from that into the F-35 and then eventually to the F-22 Raptor, which is kind of like the best plane that you can buy during your first go through the campaign mode. Once you have the F-22 Raptor, things become much easier. And even in the later missions, I found myself having an easier time completing those later missions than I did during the earlier missions, which are way simpler. But because of the planes you have, and combined with the standard controls that I was using, the Star Fox control, as I called them, I was having a hard time completing the stages. I never had to replay a stage more than twice, but it was very frustrating sometimes when you were in a dodgefight or trying to follow an enemy fighter and they outmaneuver you. It's very frustrating when you have those earlier planes. Their mobility is very low. Your homing capabilities are very low, so you do have to either upgrade them or get a better jet fighter. And of course, again, once you get planes like the F-35, the F-22 Raptor, now now we're talking. Now we're back in business, and I was able to enjoy the game more. The more I played the game, I was able to play or enjoy the game more because of the unlocks. Now it's unfortunate that you do have to quote unquote grind a little bit playing multiplayer, and that could be a turn off for a lot of players. I did have to play multiplayer, and the bad thing is this game came out in early 2019. So as you guys can figure it out, number one, the multiplayer community is not very active anymore, so it's very hard to get into a server. And number two, the very few servers that are active have very, very skilled players out there. So as you guys can imagine, I was getting murdered, especially because I was playing the multiplayer modes with like the low level planes. So as you guys can imagine, I was being just completely destroyed by other players out there, and it wasn't very fun. But the good news is that no matter if you're a good player or a bad player, you still get a lot of MRP, which is the currency in the game. So even if you even if you suck at the multiplayer, you're almost guaranteed to get like 60,000, 70,000 MRPs. And just to give you like a comparison, the most expensive plane, the Raptor, is like 980,000 MRPs. So you do have to buy certain fighters before you can get to buy that one. So you do have to grind, and you can either replay the missions on the single player or play multiplayer. Playing multiplayer is the fastest way, so I did have fun. I did defend myself the best I could. There are two multiplayer modes, Battle Royale and Team Deathmatch. Team Deathmatch was a little bit more fun because you play on a team, so you can always rely on your better teammates, and I did pretty well in that, kind of like playing a support role, just distracting other enemy fighters and whatnot. But the truth of the matter is that the players that are playing multiplayer now are very advanced. I can almost see them playing at home with not with controllers, with the joystick that it's out there, with the actual controllers, joystick controllers for jet games and whatnot. So it was a little bit frustrating, but nevertheless, at the same time, I had fun in a way. So I was able to collect enough money to upgrade certain parts of my planes, and of course later on I was able to get the F-22 a little bit later in the game. But once I got that, the difficulty became easier. As I was saying, when you play easy, it felt more like normal to me, and so forth. But the missions are they do a good job of Project Aces does a good job of trying not to make them repetitive. Like, they have a lot of quote-unquote gimmicks in missions, such as being able to avoid enemy radars, or sometimes the weather conditions. Certain missions you play like during a storm, like a sandstorm, so you have very, very low visibility, so you have to be very close to the enemies in order to lock on into them. Some missions have like lightning strikes or thunders, where if you're hit by lightning, your plane loses like all the radar capabilities. So you have to like manually control the plane until you regain the capabilities back. Some missions are kind of like time attacks, where you have to reach a certain score before the time runs out, so you have to kill a lot of enemies quick. So they do give a lot of variety, and basically your enemies revolve around being air units or ground units. You can equip your planes accordingly per the mission. You have I really enjoyed sitting through the briefing before each mission, and that kind of gives you an impression of what to expect. So if you have a mission where there's going to be a lot of ground units, of course, I would tend towards using planes that are more appropriate for air-to-ground scenarios, such as like the A-10 Thunderbolt, which is if you guys play the Battlefield games, Battlefield 3, that's kind of like a perennial fighter game. It's available to use that in certain missions. So the A-10 Thunderbolt, for example, is perfect for ground units. And if you have, for example, missions that you're gonna have air-to-air combat. You can use other planes that are more appropriate for that. The F-18s, the F-35s, and then you have like the F-22 Raptor, which is like the best plane in the game. You can use that for any mission, and you can choose your weapons accordingly, and that's always very fun to do. So very fun game. I had a lot of fun. The game does take place around between 10 to 15 hours. That's how much time I put into the game. The game does have 20 missions, and again, I do recommend playing the game and unlocking the better planes as soon as you can to have more fun, because some enemy types like the drones are very maneuverable and they have very high mobility, so it'll be very frustrating even on the easy difficulty. Not so much dying too much, but keeping pace with them. It's very frustrating when your plane is very slow, and when your jet fighter is very slow and you cannot outmaneuver them. And of course, playing with standard controls doesn't help the cause, but it is what it is. And you always have to keep in mind your airspeed, your elevation. Even when you're homing into enemies using that third-person perspective, you have to have a good understanding of your surroundings. You have to learn how to use your radar to spot enemies, to know what targets are next and whatnot. So overall, it was a very fun game, even though, again, it's leaning towards that arcade type of gameplay. I found a lot of strategy involved, and even when playing the game on easy and with standard controls, you still have to know what's going on. You can't just plow through the game to enjoy the story or anything like that. You do have to put some effort into using a good strategy for each level, depending if it's air-to-air or air-to-ground, and depending on the briefing, depending on weather conditions. I think the game does give the player a lot of freedom in order to prepare for each mission, and I did really enjoy that. So with that being said, Ace Combat 7 was a very fun game. Highly recommended if you guys enjoy flying combat games, and I did have a fantastic time. And the game does have VR missions. I think they are exclusive to the PlayStation 4, and as you guys know, I do own a PlayStation 4 VR unit or headset, but I did not play, and my VR headset is tucked away in the box right now. And I do plan to, dusting it off and playing it at one point. And Ace Combat 7 is one of those games that I do want to experience it on VR, even though I think I'm going to get very sick as soon as I start rolling the plane, because I believe expert controls are a must. You have to play with those for the VR missions. Yeah, I want to try that at one point or another. I did play Eve Valkyrie on the PSVR, and that was a little bit dizzy. So I do want to go back and play the VR missions at one point. But keep that in mind. That's another perk of this game, that it does include some VR missions for the PlayStation 4 version at least. So that's it for now. Hopefully you guys enjoyed my impressions video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all later.